Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Association of the United States Army's annual meeting and trade show in Washington, D.C. Our coverage here is sponsored by AM General, Elbit Systems of America, General Motors, Hydrotech, L3 Technologies, and Leonardo DRS. And we've got with us once more Tom Greco, who is the G2, the Head of Intelligence at the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command. Sir, thanks very much for meeting with us again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
Now your finished product is out, the operational environment and the changing character of future warfare. You've been looking at all series of convergences, commercial, societal, technological. Talk to us a little bit about what some of the key takeaways are. Small document, but big impact.
So this is about 5 years worth of study and really divides the world into our thinking and thinking in time into two areas. For about the next 20 years, it's an area of advanced human performance, and then after that is advanced competition with potential adversaries.
And when you look at, what are some of the particular threats that you see in that environment as you've studied it? And what are some of the technological, societal, political convergences you see that are going to complicate but also give us opportunities?
So the greatest challenge right now is the gray zone between competition and when competition turns to warfare. It used to be very clear, peace and war. Now what we're finding, adversaries using a hybrid approach to fighting or not fighting, using all national power. It's much more complicated between war and not war. We're in this era of competition.
And would that be sort of interference in elections, as we've seen, all sorts of other techniques, for example, Russia in particular has been using, or even China has been using to pressure its neighbors into trying to make, or to try to compel its neighbors into making concessions?
So the information sphere is really important. You can gain a lot of effects without having to resort to kinetic attack. So that's one of the things we look at. I think perhaps the most important part of our study, actually though, is less to do with the information sphere. It's going to be the merger of the information sphere with new technologies.
And talk to us a little bit about that convergence. I mean, we're both Apple Watch wearers. You've got the 3, I've got the 1. Talk to us a little bit about what that device says about the future that we're heading into.
So I would offer a metaphor. If you think back to the flip phone versus the iPhone. The kids who are freshmen in college now, they've had an iPhone since the time they're in the 2nd or 3rd grade. Where we're going with technology is we're going to start to see the convergence of lots of different technologies. The same way we saw the convergence of lots of technologies onto your iPhone, we're going to see them across the spectrum of human endeavor.
Let me ask you one more question, and that's about the latest Zapad military exercises that the Russians were doing. What did you, as a professional military thinker, think about what they recently did, and what sort of adaptation the United States Army has to do as you think about, not just this document, but your full-time job is to look at all of these threats and how the Army has to adapt to them. What did you see when you looked at that exercise?
So the Russian threat is is an extremely important threat for us to consider. While we may never fight the Russians, we will clearly have to deal with their equipment because they sell their equipment to lots of different places. During the Zapad exercise, they demonstrated the fact that they're pretty good with the gear that they have. We should expect in future conflict to be contested in every domain: ground, sea, air, cyber, and in space.
Do you think that there's enough creative thinking on the part of our leadership about the vastness of the threat and how very adaptive enemies, for example, or adversaries like the Chinese and the Russians are using, again, the information space, all of these soft levers of power to change the Soviets tried it throughout the Cold War, but they were never as effective as the Russians are today.
Right. So the 9/11 Commission said that there were 3 failures: a failure to collaborate, a failure of policy, and then a failure of imagination. A failure of imagination is perhaps the most inexcusable. Why we did this work, the changing character of future war, was to get at that failure of imagination. So we should expect to see in the future the convergence of quantum computing, nanotechnologies, our neuroplasticity, across a whole realm of different capabilities, in the same way that we saw a bunch of applications come from your flip phone to your iPhone. We should expect to see that across different technologies. Future vehicles will not only carry people around or be platforms for weapon systems. There'll also be sensors and communications relays and probably net energy producers.
I was talking to a very smart friend of mine recently, and we were talking about China and the China threat. And one of the things that he said is, hey look, we're never going to fight China. And he said, first, there's the demographic challenge. Second is the economic challenge. Third, he said, is the technological challenge. He said, the reality is the surging of Chinese technology is such that, he said, at this point, he said, I'm not sure whether we can ever have the volume, the scale, the size. And he said, and I think we both know it. Now he is somebody who's in the commercial sphere, but he's also in defense, and he is a big thinker. How do recognitions like that, or information like that, change the way that you think about a potential conflict, where you line everything up, right? That's what nations historically have done. Line up their assets, line up the enemy assets, line up available manpower, available industrial capacity, and at some point somebody makes the calculation, A, I can take them or not, or B, the other guy goes, this guy isn't even a threat for me, I'm quantum times bigger and more powerful, and also, by the way, I have all of these economic leverages that nobody considered me having 100 years ago.
Well, so the first part of your question was about fighting China as a threat. We're probably never going to fight China, I think that's true, but we will have to fight Chinese capabilities. They sell our stuff to other people, so we shouldn't be surprised if during the course of the future we have to fight Chinese equipment. To the second part of your question, are they going to be bigger, are they going to be stronger? Well, certainly they have demographics in their favor. They graduate a lot more engineers than we do, but that doesn't necessarily make them more effective. We've seen lots of countries which have very effective equipment. We sell our gear to lots of countries, and they may not be quite as good. If in fact we were to face an adversary who had superior capabilities and larger scale, we would have to find their weaknesses and take advantage, exploit them, and avoid their strengths, just as our adversaries do to us today. Right now, we're the premier force. The greater challenge for the United States is not to fall into the Thucydides trap, Sparta and Athens. As one state becomes more powerful, or one state is on top, another state looks like it's catching up, not to use that as a pretext for confrontation, but to use it as a pretext for collaboration. I think we have a lot more in common with China, especially economically, than we have differences with China. I think we can do a lot of good for the world working together.
That is the thesis of Graham Allison's book, The Thucydides Trap. Do you get concerned that that disparity, though, reduces the effectiveness of the American military, conventional military deterrent in particular, especially if you have a nation state that does its own tally and goes, I'm not going to be all that bothered about their military capability.
Yeah, well, as a student of history and being well-read, you know that the stronger, larger nation doesn't always prevail. So even if they had more and even if their stuff were better, that doesn't necessarily guarantee them a victory. So we are still the preeminent force. I think as you read our study for the next 20 years, we think we will continue to be the preeminent military power on the planet. In the era after that, I think there's going to be a change to the character of warfare, and we'll start to see more capabilities besides just destructive capabilities playing an increasing role in warfare.
Tom, thanks so very much. Always enjoy the conversation. Look forward to coming down to TRADOC and seeing you there.
Thank you very much.